Freedom Counsel is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Counsel is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcounsel.org.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage.
And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
With Broken Truth, I am John Davidson, and today Wonder Mendenhall is out, but we do have the wonderful and talented Jennifer Kennedy here with us from Freedom Counsel. And today our guest is Dr. Simone Gold, and I just want to give a quick update about what this is about. This was a case that reverberated around the world. A patient prescribed hydroxychloroquine died after a referral from American Frontline doctors. It was covered by platforms like The Intercept and Time Magazine. And the death was used to silence and stop prescribers of hydroxychloroquine and substantiate warnings about the medication's safety. There's a big update, but none of those platforms have covered this. And today we're going to bring on Dr. Simone Gold. Welcome, Dr. Gold.
Hello, hello.
Sorry, double clicked. Dr. Gold, welcome. So this was a huge case. It got a lot of attention, and there was a lot of, can you just describe how this case came to you and the situation behind it and kind of fill us in on what went down?
Yes, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and it is a really important case, like you said. So I think people who are familiar with you are aware of all the work that you've done in hydroxychloroquine. I come at it from the perspective of being both a physician and also an attorney. So when COVID happened, I was really struck by the medical propaganda and disinformation that the federal government was putting out, calling it, public health strategies, but it wasn't. It was the wrong information for patients. And over time, we learned it was very, very political, and it was really doing a lot of harm to our constitutional republic. So from a lawyer and a doctor perspective, I jumped in. From the human perspective, which is, the medications, of course, from the human perspective, hydroxychloroquine is a fantastic drug. It's been a FDA-approved drug for decades, many decades. It's one of the safest drugs on the planet. In fact, most nations treat it like a vitamin, not like a drug. We, of course, in America, it's prescription. However, most nations, it's not by prescription. The reason it's by prescription in America is the use for it in America is really only amongst people who see doctors anyway, right? It's for people who've got rheumatoid arthritis or people who have lupus. Those patients always are going to doctors anyway. So it really didn't make any harm, and there really is no over-the-counter demand for it. So there was no pharmaceutical manufacturer who felt the need to put this in the shelves of the pharmacies. That's why it's not over the counter in America. It is over the counter in much of the world. But when COVID happened, we were suddenly being very restricted from hydroxychloroquine. And of course, independent doctors started looking at it more closely, really found it to be extremely helpful in viral illnesses, especially SARS-2, which causes COVID if you don't treat it early. And then we started looking at other drugs that can be repurposed to help patients, such as ivermectin. So we paid a lot more attention in these days to safe, cheap, generic, old medicines that can be repurposed to help patients with other diseases. This case was because during COVID, when the average person couldn't get help from their own physician, right? Their own physician had been poisoned against the idea of using safe, generic, early medication treatments that had been around for decades. Many Americans intelligently looked for other sources. They looked for doctors who were not woke, doctors who were awake, I like to say. And they found that in online telemedicine platforms. And we were probably the largest referral. We were the most well-known doctors, America's Frontline doctors. And we set up on our website a lot of it free information, like FLCCC did. We set up a lot of free information about COVID, medical facts. And one of the things we set up was information about telemedicine, telehealth providers whom you could go and have a consult with, on Zoom and determine if you wanted to get or needed hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, and you can obtain a prescription, et cetera. Now, America's Frontline Doctors was not in the business of doing telemedicine. It was an important business. I fully supported it, but I had my hands full with the medical freedom litigation we were doing. I couldn't do two things. So what I did instead was we listed on America's Frontline Doctors site, hey, these people will do this. So there was several. I think we listed about 5. No reason, I'm not even sure any are even still in business. I honestly don't know, but a lot of people have popped up in this time, and we listed them, and that was it. We never tracked the people. We never kept any information. We didn't hire clinical doctors to see patients. We had no regulatory compliance. We are a nonprofit putting out public information. We write essays, we write news pieces, we do videos, all the things you expect a communication around medical freedom issues. And that's it. And we had nothing to do with the telemedicine component whatsoever. We certainly didn't own a telemedicine company, et cetera. And that was it. Now, a lot of people believed I had done that because I became kind of a point person for early treatment and medical freedom in general. So a lot of people amongst themselves said things like, oh, that's, Dr. Gold, that's how you can get hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. It happened to not be true. That's fine. It was not an offensive thing people said about me as opposed to other things they said. But there was sort of a general perception that that's what I did. However, even 5 minutes of research would have determined that that wasn't the case. A lot of people who wanted to silence me intentionally printed misinformation that I was doing this. One of them is The Intercept that you just mentioned. So The Intercept ran an article, I think it was in July of 2021 or 22, maybe 21, very early, saying that Frontline Doctors was prescribing and we were making millions of dollars doing this. At the time this article came out, I was really perplexed because I didn't understand the angle of why anybody would write this article. It was completely false, had no basis in reality at all. And we were kind of scrambling to say, this isn't true, but it wasn't really any harmful to us. So that's what it was. 6 months later, or 5 months later, no, 3 months later, Congress came after America's Frontline Doctors based on this article. Now, that's my first major point to share with your audience, that Congress came after a nonprofit and me personally for ostensibly prescribing a cheap, safe, generic drug that's FDA approved. And their basis for doing this was an article in The Intercept, because we got communications with Congress and I expected them to have some kind of basis for this. And what I found out is their basis was The Intercept article. That was shocking to me as an American citizen, that that's the best that Congress can do. I mean, that was number one effort to stop me, was to send Congress after me. And that's in fact what they did. They sent Congress after me. And I can keep going on, but I don't know if you knew about this. That's the article. I haven't seen that in a while. So they put forward, this is a completely fabricated article where they said that America's Frontline Doctors databases were hacked, and hundreds of thousands or millions of people had their patient data exposed, hacked, security breaches, and they linked me and Frontline Doctors to it. And everything about this article was false. Most foundationally, we didn't have any patients. So there was nothing to hack from the American Frontline Doctor side, 0 patients. Then it turned out that the telemedicine company, I guess, that they said was involved with this, had to do an expensive kind of audit to determine, and they determined that there was no hacking, there was no breach, there was nothing. So that was also completely fabricated. So the whole thing was fabricated. The whole thing made no sense. It was scary at the time. I remember where I was when I was fighting this. But what happened to us personally was a couple months later is Congress came after us using this as the basis. It was, I don't know, that's very depressing as an American citizen, that this is the basis for a congressional inquiry, essentially into a private citizen. And I had to deal with that for about 15 months. And then it finally stopped. It actually stopped because the 2022 elections, the midterms flipped so that the Coronavirus Task Force Committee of Congress that came after me switched to Jim Jordan as in charge instead of the lunatic Democrat who's in charge. Yeah, that guy. That guy's horrific. That guy's absolutely horrific. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot more that I could say, but I don't want it just to be a monologue. That's how it all started.
Well, Dr. Gold, interestingly, so the really sad part about this case, of course, was that they were alleging that a father had died by taking this hydroxychloroquine that he got through this referral prescription. And that wrongful death is what they were directly trying to attribute to America's frontline doctors. That was latched onto by that Intercept article, which of course, any death during the COVID time was awful and horrific and sadly needless and preventable. So that I'm sure grabbed attention at the time. The headlines that this man was killed by America's frontline doctors, which could not have been farther from the truth.
Yes, and I just let's fast forward a little bit. So that was I lose track of the timeline. You're right. They did mention that in this article, and I didn't even pick up on that at the time. I didn't know what they were talking about. But it turned out there was a fellow, his name is Jeremy Parker, and apparently he was a fan of America's Frontline Doctors, and he found his way to our website. And by the way, all of this information took a long time to put together. I did not find out about it in this coherent order. The way I found out about it was very like piece by piece by piece. But what actually happened was this fellow, Jeremy Parker, was a fan or supportive of Frontline Doctors and had gone to the Frontline Doctors website to learn more about COVID. And on the website, he ends up seeing where if you are interested in hydroxychloroquine or seeing a doctor who's awake, you can go to any one of these telemedicine companies, whatever. And apparently he did that. And of course, I would have no knowledge of that. I had no idea. That's what actually happened. So he left our website. I should get for you. We had a screen on our website saying like you're leaving our site, you go into another site, and then you go to another site. About a year after that article, I think maybe we were served, maybe even later, a year and a half, we were served, America's Frontline Doctors were served with a wrongful death lawsuit that you just mentioned. And the wrongful death lawsuit alleged that the telemedicine doctor who prescribed hydroxychloroquine caused Jeremy Parker's death, and that America's Frontline Doctors, I guess as a public advocate for this, is also causing the death. Now, oh my gosh, as a lawyer, like my head was exploding. We are most akin to a newspaper, a publishing site. We put out information. How could you possibly say that information we put out makes us a defendant in what is essentially a medical malpractice case? So that was just giant erroneous from my perspective as a lawyer. It had nothing to do with it, and we should have been dismissed immediately. Any judge should have looked at this case and said, oh my God, this is like a charity that puts out public information. They don't do medicine. I mean, no offense to like the poor level of the judges in this country, but oh my gosh, it's not that hard to distinguish a public charity from a business that's seeing patients. I mean, there's so much regulation around the subject of seeing patients, and we did not get dismissed right away. That was shocking to me that the judges are so, I don't have words to like how disappointed I am in judges. I mean, it is not difficult to see that a public charity that doesn't employ clinical physicians, that doesn't do any verification of licensures, that doesn't have a setup to see patients, that doesn't prescribe. None of that infrastructure existed at all. None. By the way, you can check our 990s. You can see who's on staff. I mean, all of this is easily verified. So of course we put that in our initial, please dismiss us, judge. And the judge does not dismiss us. And this is for me, extortion, plain and simple, flat out extortion, that they pulled us into this case and then that the judge complies by not dropping us.
We know it's interesting, of course, is we see this, right, in other contexts. You see this all the time in the personal injury context where maybe you sue the other driver as well as the driver's employer. You're looking for a deep pocket, unfortunately. Perhaps that had something to do with trying to drag the frontline doctors in. You weren't named personally, but the frontline doctors were named. And perhaps that's what they thought their target was going to be for money, a settlement.
Yes, I have so much fun stuff to tell you. I'm glad, John, that you are doing this interview because I'm going to name names. I'm not shy about naming who's at fault and who the crap that people did. They should be held accountable. They should lose their jobs. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I'm going to absolutely name names. The worst offenders in this, and then we'll go into more details, but the worst offenders here are the medical examiners. I'm going to give you their names. They should have letters of complaint written to the boards against them for the shallow and biased, politically motivated way in which they practice medicine. It's despicable. And the ambulance chasing lawyer. It was a classic case of an ambulance chaser. So let's start with explaining the case. So the case is this fellow dies. Now he's at his friend's house. He's a married man with kids. It was a little odd, right? He's sleeping at his friend's home. We understand later the marriage was not in great shape. He's sleeping at his friend's home and he very unfortunately dies. By the way, he seemed like a decent fellow. Like he's a hardworking guy. He's supporting a wife and kids. And, it's always unfortunate if somebody young, on the younger side dies. Nonetheless, the allegation by the woman who was married to him at the time of the death was that he took one 200 milligram hydroxychloroquine pill and that killed him. And she was adamant about it. She was adamant that he took one and she was adamant that it killed him. There's so many things wrong with that from a factual basis. It's absolutely impossible for a single hydroxychloroquine pill to kill someone. Impossible as a factual matter. In other words, as a lawyer, you need to throw this out. This is like saying, a rubber duck picked up a gun and shot me in the head and killed me. I mean, it's ludicrous. So as a factual matter, her allegation didn't stand any factual examination at all. The attorney, Luke Busby is the definition of an ambulance chasing attorney. And I say that with total confidence because now I've watched him for 2.5 years or however long it was. And in the beginning, I was willing to think he didn't know, he didn't understand, he's being sympathetic to somebody who lost a husband. Oh no. After more than a year of this and reading expert witnesses, then we do a deposition. And I did that deposition for hours. And he was perfectly polite. And I was polite. And I am a teacher above all. And I taught him everything he needed to know. And I sent him to websites. And I showed him medical articles. And I explained how it was utterly impossible for hydroxychloroquine to have killed this man. It was absolutely impossible. We also reviewed emails between the coroners revealing political bias to attack America's frontline doctors. All of this. Once I personally gave him all of this information and Luke Busby doubled down trying to destroy frontline doctors so he could get a paycheck, he is an ambulance chasing lawyer. Luke Busby. If you run into him and you want to hire him, just run in the other direction. I don't mind saying it like it is, John.
And interestingly, you mentioned the coroner because the coroner there, and this is a Nevada case, the coroner in Washoe County concluded that Mr. Parker's death was caused by, quote, sudden death in the setting of therapeutic use of hydroxychloroquine. So they had a doctor's note, essentially, which likely helped continue this case through, past that layer where you would have expected the initial dismissal. But as you mentioned, shocking to you as a lawyer, is shocking to me as well as a litigator in the COVID space, how much civil procedure goes out the window when you add what I call the COVID layer. We see this continuing to this day.
So I remember sitting in civil procedure, a case like this, a hypothetical, if we'd been given, it would have been thrown out because there was just literally no factual basis. In addition, I don't know if you all know, there were emails between the two coroners. Their names are J. Stahl-Hertz, I'm looking at it right now, and Laura Knight with a K, K-N-I-G-H-T. Okay, so their
And which
emails
coroners are these? Which coroners?
This is Nevada Washoe
Washoe County.
County, Nevada. I will make sure I will send these to you. Okay. It is fascinating. You read their emails and they are literally ignorant of the science behind hydroxychloroquine. They're speculating on a political issue. They're saying that America's frontline doctors essentially should be ashamed and embarrassed and blaming America's frontline doctors for death. And they're supposed to be scientists. And again, Dr. Lawyer and me, a death certificate is a scientific document that's a legal document that determines lots of things after it's signed. So they played fast and loose with a legal document that could have millions of dollars at stake, depending on the person's situation, by their own political bias. And when you read their emails to each other, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. They scorned and mocked and were very suspicious of any doctor who prescribed hydroxychloroquine. That's it. Now, from a medical perspective, it's hard being me sometimes because it's medical and legal. From a medical perspective, the telemedicine company that had prescribed Jeremy Parker hydroxychloroquine had prescribed 10 pills. 10 200 milligram pills is a total of 2,000 milligrams, which is extraordinarily far from the lethal dose. 2,000 milligrams could never have killed a man, and his wife was adamant that he took one pill. I mean, it just was unbelievable. The fact pattern was outrageous. 2,000 milligrams, which is the total amount he had access to, couldn't have done it. And she said he took one. So from a factual basis, it was absolutely without grounds. And you had the bias of the medical examiners.
And Dr. Gold, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Didn't they go back to blood analysis 2 or 3 times to try to find hydroxychloroquine in his blood?
Yeah, I had forgotten that fact. He had a very low dose of hydroxychloroquine in his blood. Hydroxychloroquine is a very common drug. In my whole career, 25 years, I never drawn a level of hydroxychloroquine in your blood. I've never even heard of it. Like, it's just not something you do because it's a very, very safe drug. It's a chronic long-term drug, and there's just no reason to ever check for it. So they went back and they checked for a level after conversations with this woman. They went back and checked, and then they find like a tiny amount, like a really low amount. I mean, it certainly didn't help their case. I felt it was very suspicious. They even looked. It was highly bizarre. And we had pathologists ready to testify. We never do hydroxychloroquine levels. It's just not a thing to do. I
Right.
mean, we do know. Oh my gosh, it gets even worse. I completely forgot. So you have the ambulance chasing attorney. You have the woman who's married to him who was really greedy. I can explain that, but I guess we don't need to go into that part, but there was a lot of testimony about that, of her grifting in other areas throughout for her life, basically.
Oh, and Dr. Gold, I want to, just for our listeners, I want to interrupt. The testimony you're talking about is the discovery, right? There were depositions, there was written discovery, but no, not at all. But just, and spoiler alert, the case was dismissed. So we're getting to the point where, so none of that really was ever, it didn't go to trial. It wasn't litigated on the stand because it ultimately fell apart legally.
Perfect, Jennifer. Exactly right. So all of this is sworn testimony, but it wasn't done, in front of the public's eyes. But of course, I have transcripts of everything, and I can certainly, they could be, they went on for hours. I'm not sure the audience would really want to read them, but everything I'm saying, was sworn testimony. So you had the ambulance chasing attorney, you had the medical examiners who admitted their political bias. And here's the worst part, and here's why, as a doctor, I'm so offended. By the way, our good friend, Dr. Finn, kind of pointed this out to me, and I went back and I looked at the autopsy. So there's the autopsy, which is the examination that the coroners do of the body. And then they write a report, right? It's several pages long, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the brains, all of it. Then there's the death certificate, which is what you just flashed a moment before. And that just is, more like administrative. And there's 1 or 2 lines, the cause of death and contributory causes of death. Right. So that's like the legal. In the autopsy, so in the cause of death, they write sudden death in the setting of therapeutic hydroxychloroquine. It wasn't even therapeutic. It was subtherapeutic. Number 2, nobody would write it. It's about as relevant as saying sudden death in the setting of Tylenol. Like, it's not something you would ever say. So they were clearly trying to shift it. Now, you don't need to have gone to medical school or pathology residency to say sudden death. Yet we know he died suddenly. He literally like died at his friend's house suddenly, sudden death. So I just thought this was a little bit embarrassing. Like they didn't say anything else. When you went and read the autopsy report, though, this cause of death was clear. He had what's called dilated cardiomyopathy. He had a weak, floppy heart. Dilated cardiomyopathy has a what's the number? I think it's 10%. I don't want to say the number. I have forgotten. It's been a while. But a fairly high for his age chance of sudden death every year with dilated cardiomyopathy. Let's say, I don't think it's as high as 10%, but it is a large cause of sudden death. If you've got dilated cardiomyopathy, you absolutely have a chance of dropping dead for no reason in your daily life. Because of that, people with dilated cardiomyopathy usually get implantable defibrillators. That's if you know somebody who's walking around with an implantable defibrillator, it's because most of the time they have dilated cardiomyopathy. The sad part is some people have dilated cardiomyopathy, they didn't know it, and then they dropped dead and they never knew it. So in his case, I think he never knew it because there was testimony that he didn't know he had any heart condition. But it's very clear in the autopsy. There were multiple findings consistent with it, and the coroners actually write it. So I ask you, how is it that they write it in the autopsy? Again, Dr. J. Stahl-Hertz and Dr. Laura Knight, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You wrote it in the autopsy, dilated cardiomyopathy, and you don't write it on the death certificate? I honestly, there's no words for me
John,
as their
John, can you
medical
bring it up
peer.
again? What we
Yeah.
see there. Yep. You see the number one cause, and then you do not see that second consequence. And Dr. Gold, isn't it common? Sometimes they even have three. There are multiple causes of death, kind of in a progressive order. And this only has the one.
It's so obvious that they specifically left it out. I mean, I still can't believe it. I mean, I still just, coroners deal with people who are dead, so there's less lawsuits, but this would be like, a cardiologist missing a heart attack. I mean, this is just so big.
Very similar, actually, to cause of death, from COVID. Died of, and then really honestly, it was something else underneath, of course, whether it was the pneumonia or whatever.
It was like when they flipped it during COVID and they said it was COVID, but it was really their underlying problem. But
motorcycle
in this case,
accident.
they didn't even have the decency to write it anywhere in the death certificate. So then you look at the judge, and the judge is like, when he's looking at it for the 5 minutes for the motion for summary judgment, initially when we're trying to get the thing thrown out in the beginning, maybe he spent 20 minutes on the case. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't spend much time, but he's looking at it and he's not seeing anything other than, sudden cardiac death in the setting of hydroxychloroquine. And then there's doctor group over here. Maybe they're related. Okay, we'll keep him in the case till we get all the facts sorted out. That, I think, is how the judges think. So if the doctors had done their part and literally just written the autopsy result that they found, in other words, I didn't find it, they found it. They left it out. Them leaving it out caused America's frontline doctors massive financial harm.
And how much would you say in terms of financial harm, in terms of defending this case over the years that it took to reach this ultimate complete dismissal? What does that cost?
Right. So I sometimes am in denial about it because it's so sad. It was over $250,000. And the reason is because it went on for 2.5 years. We had to have a cardiologist expert and a pathology expert. You had to have a hydroxychloroquine expert who testified on this. There were so many experts involved. There were so many motions. Also, attorney Luke Busby, ambulance chasing attorney Luke Busby, wouldn't quit. He amended his complaint like, I don't know, 4 times, 5 times. Every time.
I think it was 3. Yeah.
Every time there was another reason why he should drop us, he refused, and he kept amending. It was ridiculous. So it cost us a lot of money.
Wasn't one of the experts for the plaintiff a neighbor?
Yeah, you actually alerted me to that, John. And
Okay.
we never got that far.
Wait, one of the
never got to
experts was
trial.
a neighbor? Who was the
Yeah.
Yeah.
was the expert?
He was a
specialty?
physician, I believe. He was a physician with prison system, and then also associated with University Reno, Nevada.
Yeah, we had such fine experts, and they really had terrible quality experts. So this particular guy, I don't remember his name, but you might. He actually, I think what struck me about him is something you showed me, which is when he was a doctor in the prison system, somebody needed eye surgery and he denied them. He said, well, you had two eyes, and so if one goes bad, what the heck? I mean, I don't know. I don't care if you're a prisoner or not a prisoner. That's ridiculous. And that was something he, and he was reprimanded for that later. That had nothing to do with our case. But I mean, that's the quality physician you're talking about. Our experts were really high qualified, amazing physicians.
You've got this attorney that's an ambulance chaser. You've also got the mother being propped up by extreme left-wing narrative media. And it wasn't just The Intercept. It was also, let me pull this one up. It was Time Magazine.
Yeah.
And please explain to me how this is not a completely loaded. Right-wing doctors are still peddling dubious COVID drugs. Yeah. And it goes with a woman who was fired for being too liberal from a university, saying that her father was killed by ivermectin. And then it goes down to the story of Mrs. Hatfield. So, it's always slanted to support a political narrative. And what a disaster. And shame on Time Magazine and The Intercept. And by the way, the author of this now, I think, is off at Washington Post, Vera Bergen-Gruen.
And look at the date there, May of 2023. Yeah, wait, John, are you saying that the mainstream media has bias and isn't afraid to use it in its reporting? Is that what you're saying?
I know that sounds crazy, but it's the only thing that makes sense.
I want to show you something. If you could go back up on that again, what you just showed on the Time Magazine article, I want to show you. And by the way, the lack of curiosity of reporters is shocking. Nobody ever called us. If you scroll down a little bit more, if you scroll down, I want to show your viewers something. There's so many aspects of the story more. See, stop. You see the prescription? So you have to understand, and I know Jennifer as an attorney is going to notice this right away. They pull in the doctor who prescribed the medicine. So that's essentially a medical malpractice case. And of course, it had no legs. Got it. But what did it have to do with frontline doctors? Well, look up here. This is the prescription he got. And it's people saying that they're us, but not us, right? It says info@telemedplatform.co. This wasn't us. In other words, right there, it says it. And you're telling me that the Time newspaper article writer doesn't even have the decency to connect the dots himself. I mean, I just remember when journalists used to be kind of curious. I don't know.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And then to follow through on the detail.
And by the way, the guy died in late February. This prescription is early October. So it's October, November, December, January, 5 months later from 10 pills. And they're not even curious enough to investigate this. It's just sad, right? It's kind of sad,
Right. They just accepted the from, look, it's even in quotes, America's frontline doctors. It's very similar to those things everyone's getting on the phone. They're coming across the messages saying, you didn't pay your toll, and click here to pay your toll. And it's a completely different email, and nobody's looking at that. So that's
right. Yeah. So the judge also didn't look at that. He really should have. There's so much blame to go around. I mean, I'm a doctor watching the medical system. I'm a lawyer watching the legal system. But I really resent that we're a modest or small to modest-sized charity doing really good, important work. And a judge just doesn't care. He didn't care. I mean, the lawyer did what he did, and the woman trying to get money did what she did. But the judge is the last man standing there. And when he finally paid attention to the case, he dismissed us immediately. Like, that's the craziest thing. It's like when he finally looked at it, John, I'm just telling you, when we finally got his eyes on it, which was like 2.5 years later, he dismissed it, and he dismissed it hard. It was like unequivocal.
Yes, unequivocal, without prejudice, and with prejudice. With prejudice. With prejudice means there is nothing you can add to this complaint. There is no theory and no facts that you can do this that's going to make it survive. And so that is a slamming of the door judicially right there. So in November of 2025, the judge, like you said, finally came around and close the door immediately. And of course, that was back last November. There's no chance of appeal, et cetera. So the case is deceased.
However, they denied us attorney fees.
Interesting. You know, and for our listening public, it's really interesting to know. In the American rule is you pay to play, right? You pay your own attorney's fees generally, unless after a judgment you can collect them because of some type of contract or maybe a statute. There's some reason, or you can seek them if the lawsuit has been frivolous. Right. So did you go in, Dr. Gold, on a frivolous theory that this obviously had no, look, he denied it with prejudice and there was no underpinning for it, and still your attorney's fees were denied?
Yeah, so we have the opportunity. We're still deciding if we're going to appeal the district judge's decision to deny attorney fees. But it's hard, right? Because he gave us a complete victory. He understood that we were being completely dragged in. You don't then want to say he made a mistake in one area, not in another. However, it's horrific. It's extortion. I mean, I don't know what else you can call this but blackmail.
And
You
in
know,
fact, didn't this case have an slap feature
yes,
to
they,
it? Now, the
yeah.
SLAPP lawsuit is the strategic lawsuit against public participation. Usually you see that when the little guy, David, comes in and sues Goliath, the corporation, and the corporation goes, oh yeah, and slaps them with a lawsuit. And you can come in and say, that's a slap, you know, stop doing that. And in this case, I think it wasn't it, the other way around? There was an anti-slap motion in there.
We did, but that was very, very early. Those were not lawyers I hired. It was a complicated situation. I'm not sure that that was handled as well as it could have been. I still think we wouldn't have prevailed because I just don't think the judge paid attention in the beginning. And now the lawyers who are litigating have advised me we should either appeal the attorney fees or not. And I don't think that we can resurrect the slap or the anti-slap. But I think my recollection from my law school days, well, this was very much a public policy lawsuit. This was absolutely to shut up a public interest, like a debate that people didn't want to hear. And by the way, when you see the emails between the coroners, you can have no doubt. I mean, they're literally talking political motives when they're supposed to be talking scientific theory. You know, it's interesting. One of the coroner says to the more senior coroner, do you think that this was related to hydroxychloroquine, the heart, right? She asks a scientific question. And I don't know, as a doctor, I would have done some research. Like if I wasn't sure, so I think it's appropriate to ask your boss, go ahead and ask your boss, but then do some research. I mean, if you're smart enough to say, oh, there's maybe this thing, then go do some research. And if she had actually done any research, she would have seen there was no actual connection between the sudden death and taking a hydroxychloroquine pill. And the woman, you know, who brought the lawsuit was very adamant always that her husband only took one pill. So it wasn't very hard to find in the literature that, you know, 200 milligrams of hydroxychloroquine doesn't do anything.
Right. You're talking about tonic water. I mean, didn't they find other drugs in his system, or am I incorrect in that?
I don't think so. I think she had said maybe that he had used a benzo once, like an anxiety medicine or something, but it came up later that both of them had drug use in the, you know, it came up, you know, there was a lot of denial on her part, but he was a serious drinker. And the reason that's a problem is because alcohol can cause dilated cardiomyopathy, leading to sudden death. What is an absolute fact is he had dilated cardiomyopathy on autopsy. I think as an ER doctor, he had this underlying dilated cardiomyopathy, and he was probably, I'm guessing, was drinking because he didn't know he had it, and he had sudden death. I mean, this happens. I don't think it was mysterious. You know, it's what
And
happens.
that, in your opinion, that the one hydroxychloroquine would have been just completely coincidental that evening?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with anything
No.
at all.
Let me ask this. Could this family have grounds for a lawsuit against some of these media companies that egg them on?
That's interesting. So it's so downstream, like in law, as Jennifer could fill in, like you always need the causation. So the third element, I'm just reminding people I'm a lawyer because they always think of me as a doctor. But the third element is causation. So you have a duty, like do you have a duty between people? Then the tort, something that had to have gone wrong. But then you need causation. Like is the thing that went wrong the thing that causes the damages? And I do think there's so many variables. You'd have to go in and say Time magazine caused me to think this, caused me to file. It's so speculative. I don't think anyone would take it. In addition, in this case, the woman who brought the lawsuit, she didn't pay anything. It was all on Busby. That's why I'm saying he's an ambulance chaser. He works on contingency. There's no doubt in my mind that he propped up this whole thing. No doubt. It's impossible. Now, she was no angel, but he propped it up. We actually got damages against her, but I imagine she has no, the judge awarded us $54,000, but I don't think she has any assets. I blame the lawyer more than I blame her. Again, she was no angel. I will leave it at that. You can read the transcript to see why I say that. There's a lot of lying going on. There's a lot of stuff, but I really blame the attorney for keeping a case going that he knew was completely frivolous, had no merit.
Now, the medical examiners have medical licenses. Can you file complaints against their licenses from improper?
I thought about that, and it breaks my heart in a way, like not to, because I don't want bad doctors out there. I think to some extent they're a little bit covered by being government workers.
Qualified
like,
immunity.
Yeah, I think they've got qualified immunity. And I guess I'm not optimistic about judges. I've had a lot of experience since COVID, and I've almost never seen a really good judge, and that has been very heartbreaking for me. I didn't know that. I used to, like everybody else in America, I thought judges were great. I am stunned. I'm just stunned at the lack of curiosity, the lack of there's a huge desire, I think, amongst judges to just split the baby. Clearly, they never actually read anything having to do with the Bible where Solomon doesn't split the baby. But like that's their tendency. So I'm not very optimistic about the people in charge doing anything.
What about the Medical License Board of Nevada, though?
That's actually what you said. You're right. So I considered it. I mean,
I get it. You've been through attacks like that. I'm sure it's no fun, and you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy, maybe.
I think it's not that I'm not saying no, and I'm a very transparent person, so I actually don't mind having this conversation on air. And by the way, doctors in Washoe County, if you're listening to this, you should know I'm not afraid of coming after you. That's not it. It's that I think that they all like kind of point at each other, and then the judges themselves or
Yeah.
the arbitrators in the medical board, I think they themselves get confused and they themselves are biased. So is what I think. They
And
should
also,
be
Dr. Gold, that
embarrassed.
COVID layer, it really affects every person, regardless of, as I say, regardless of profession, regardless of demographics, regardless of education level. There is something about that COVID agenda that fed into people's psyches, and it became the religion of COVID. And so when we look at the judiciary, as a matter of fact, they vaxxed themselves. They all had mandates. They probably all took it. And so it's a hard area to be in, to be litigating, because we are singing to the wrong forum, it feels like, many times.
So yes, agree. I left out something though, John. I actually did try to go after the physicians. There's so many aspects to this case. I forget some of them. Early on, we made a claim or a counterclaim, I'm not sure how it's called, in the case where we said that the coroners harmed us. They harmed us as a public charity. And the judge held that we had no standing, that we didn't have it, that they didn't, basically that the doctors didn't have a duty to us. Like we're just strangers. You have to have standing. There has to be a relationship. It's a theory I understand, except that they did harm us. Like their actions did harm us. The thing that bothers me the most is that they wrote it in their autopsy. It's not speculative. They wrote in their autopsy that he has dilated cardiomyopathy. They wrote, and by the way, it's not just a word. They say the heart was floppy and that the lungs are filled with fluid. This is dilated cardiomyopathy. There's like all this evidence of it. How in the world did you leave that off the death certificate? It can't happen by accident. It just can't. But you got me thinking, John.
Well, I'm thinking right now, I'm like, well, what if you enjoined with the widow in these suits against Time Magazine and The Intercept?
That's actually interesting. She, there are a lot of victims here. She was not innocent in what she did, but I will say that she was highly ignorant and she wanted to be ignorant, I would say. And that a compassionate medium intellect attorney would have educated her as the process went on.
And so
You're
yet
not
again,
wrong.
is it a legal malpractice action, or is it the action John's talking about maybe against Time? Like I'm sitting here thinking, what would the cause of action be? Egging on? I mean, you'd have to find what
misrepresentation of information that led the mother to make a decision caused you financial harm and her financial harm if she has to pay you
The
$54,000.
coroners, the coroners are the most the coroners are the most proximate cause of why we're all in this mess. That is, they are the but for. Is actual cause?
Yeah, but
They're
for
the
causation.
but for the coroners, none of this would have happened.
Well, in your emails, did you see why they kept going back to do toxicology reports to look for more things?
I think I only saw a couple of the times that they went back. One was because the lady didn't want it to look like he had been taking street drugs, and when they found hydroxychloroquine, she wanted them to say it was a prescription. That's why they use the word therapeutic.
Right.
But they went back. I mean, it's not unusual to do a drug screen. So I think the first one was normal, and I think then they went back for the hydroxychloroquine. I don't really remember.
I mean, but does every person that die in a nursing home with arthritis that takes
No, but he was
hydroxychloroquine, do they get
young.
that?
No. Two things. I would say that a young person that dies is going to get a tox screen, 100%, and he's still young. But getting a hydroxy screen is unheard of. I never found a single doctor. I must have asked 20 doctors. I said, have you ever even heard of a hydroxychloroquine drug level? Like, we've never even heard of it.
Well, they were
So
looking specifically for that.
yeah, because she told them, because she called them up and she volunteered this information, and she said she found this information from America's Frontline Doctors, and can they please draw a drug level? That's what happened. As a factual matter, that's what happened. But you would have thought then when you got the drug level back and it was lower than therapeutic, I mean, if you drew a Tylenol level, right? Let's say let me give you a comparison numbers wise. This would have been like taking one Tylenol and then you draw a Tylenol level, and the number you would have gotten back on the Tylenol level would have shown a small amount of Tylenol in your blood. Nobody in their right mind would ever say that has any cause of death or etiology of anything. And everybody knows that instinctively. But the average person doesn't know hydroxychloroquine. Plus, they were now propagandists to think it was dangerous. It is utterly meaningless. It is utterly meaningless.
Well, I have a particular, because media is my background, so I'm always looking like, how can we punish them for this? Because what they've done is
They convinced the widow. They convinced the wife, for sure.
and they needed this death to propagate the concept that this drug was super deadly and risky and dangerous and political. And I just want to point out, you mentioned Lynn Finn earlier, Dr. Finn. This is what it looks like when these deaths are promoted as if caused by these deaths. Here is a doctor attacking Lynn and referring to this Time magazine article. This specifically blames American Frontline Doctors for her dad's death. Now, this woman that says her father was killed is the one that was fired for being too liberal in Indiana, I believe. And who is this person? Associate Professor of Surgery, Cancer Control at the Wilmot Cancer and UR-Med system.
So people like this, though, I think what I've thought over the last few years is I don't even bother with people like this, John, because
Right.
No, because if you send this guy this video interview, for example, he won't watch it. He won't care. So they have their own agenda to say or do whatever just because they want to feel self-important, and they just say things and they're totally disinterested in the truth. I don't know. It's hard to be on the side of truth when it's so overwhelming. This isn't even a close call. That's what bothers me, is I can't even imagine what people would do if it's a close call. This is not even a close call by this is as 100 this is 100-0. This is not a close call, and you still couldn't get the judges to do the right thing. You still couldn't get the attorney to do the right thing or the coroners to do the right thing.
Talking about doing the right thing, I want to jump in and thank Dr. Gold and the America's Frontline Doctors for doing the right thing in cases I have before the Supreme Court pending review on the EUA theory, which is that no one was supposed to be induced or coerced into taking the EUA product that they called the COVID shots. And so thank you to America's Frontline Doctors for filing an amicus brief in support of every American's right to say no to what was always an investigational drug.
Thank you. You're welcome. And it's why we exist. And if I can just make a shameless plug, please, America's Frontline Doctors, AFLDS.org. The work we're most proud of, most excited about is to support cases just like Jennifer described. These cases are so important for your medical freedom. If you're listening and you're watching, it comes down to these kinds of cases, because these cases go to judges or justices that then set the parameters beyond which our other government agencies can't push past. So supporting these cases is, I think, such a good use of your money if you are a supporter of medical freedom issues. AFLDS.org. And I think, Jennifer, you said that we were the only one. And
Yes,
we are typically the only physician organization that explains, medical truth to justices who otherwise wouldn't be hearing it.
And in fact, the Supreme Court justices need to hear this, because the EUA theory that we have had in cases, 17 cases filed in all districts across the nation, it's under the radar. It does not get the Title VII religious freedom. It does not get the health freedom medical treatment. Shot didn't do infection or transmission. But the EUA theory underpins all of Americans' rights to say no without penalty to basically medical experimentation. And if our Supreme Court doesn't look at the cases in front of it now, that does not bode well in the next pandemic. And hello, can I say hantavirus? I mean, it's already here.
Right. I have a lot, by the way, it's not exactly your issue, but we have a lot to say on that. So if you come to goldcare.com, we are doing a medical town hall Tuesday night, May 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern on hantavirus. I'm hosting that with Dr. Robert Malone. It's everything you wanted to know. There's zero reason to panic, zero reason to panic. However, it's always fun to know the facts, like what's true, what's false, like what's the deal, like why are people talking about it all the time? It's going to be great. Honestly, I'm very excited.
And what's the platform again? Where's it going to be?
So thank you, John, for putting that. Goldcare, GOLDCARE.com. Sign up for the medical town hall Tuesday night, May 12th. That's tomorrow evening, 8 p.m., 1 hour. Dr. Gold and Dr. Malone in conversation about the hantavirus.
Great.
Good stuff.
Now, just so we're clear, this case is dead, 100%.
The one we've been talking about.
You know what? I would say it's not 100%, John, because the losing side still has a little bit of time left to file. I think he filed a notice that he might appeal. I think he'd be incredibly foolish to appeal. We also have the right to appeal the district court's decision to turn us down on attorney fees. So I would not say it's 100% dead, that being our legal system. But they have no merit on their side. So,
Gotcha. Well, I just want to point out to Vera Bergengruen at, I think, some Washington Post or whatever, formerly of Time, and to Micah Lee, that I've done all the hard work for you. You can find my watermarked copies of the case and dismissals on the brokentruth.tv website when I post the article for this interview later today.
I just want to say to Micah Lee and Vera, I don't even know these so-called journalists, how come you don't have any curiosity? Aren't you curious? Let's assume your worldview and you believe what you believe. No problem. Don't you find it curious that you have medical doctors talking about politics? I mean, at the end of your life, something happens to you and you have an autopsy and a death certificate. Don't you want that to be the most scientifically accurate representation of what happened? Or do you really want the coroners talking about politics? What if the coroners are Trump supporters and they're talking amongst themselves? Is that what you really want on your death certificate? I don't understand why anybody wants politics to be entering the scientific arena.
Cause of death, Trump derangement syndrome.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Gold, thank you both so much for coming. Jennifer, always a wonderful time with you.
Thank you, John.
We will have this article and interview posted on brokentruth.tv later. And thank you, everybody, for watching, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case, the right case, can change the world. If you believe this too, Freedom Counsel is for you. Pursuing a major case can be overwhelming, but we provide a community of practice so that you have the resources available to support your case. My name is Warner Mendenhall, and we are Freedom Counsel.
Join Freedom Counsel today. Freedom Counsel